A girl was kicked out of a car dealership, but the next day a millionaire showed up and everything changed. A young woman stepped into the cavernous quiet of the showroom just before closing time. The fluorescent lights reflected off polished chrome and glass, stretching long, sterile shadows across the floor. Every corner gleamed, and the air smelled faintly of leather, wax, and money. She wore a faded navy sweater stretched at the cuffs, jeans with fraying hems, and sneakers whose soles had long since surrendered to time. Her hair was tied back hastily, strands escaping in tired curls. Her face bore the look of someone who had worked a long shift, perhaps two, but there was a stillness to her gaze. Not beaten down. Measured. Deciding. She stopped beside a coupe, its body sleek and black, a low hum of potential violence beneath its beauty. She ran her fingers, unpainted and dry from soap and sanitizer, along the edge of the driver's side mirror. A small, respectful gesture. As if acknowledging it was a living thing. A salesman, pressed and polished in a slim-fit suit, noticed her from across the room. His shoes clicked against the tile as he approached, smile already forming, one of those practiced, non-committal ones that could fade in any direction depending on who stood in front of him. "Can I help you?" he asked, inflection perfectly pitched between courtesy and boredom. She nodded. "I'm interested in this car. Could you tell me more about it?" His gaze dipped to her sneakers, the scuffed toe of one tapping absently against the tile. Something in his demeanor shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The way a person might react to someone who had wandered in by mistake. He chuckled lightly. "These cars are quite expensive," he said, with the gentle condescension of someone explaining the obvious. "You might find what you're looking for at the used lot just down the road." She blinked once. Then again. Slowly. "I see," she replied, her tone still polite. No anger. Just the tightening of silence. Behind the salesman, his younger colleague smirked from the reception desk, pretending not to watch. Two other customers, both men in casual blazers, had turned their heads, curiosity briefly piqued. The woman did not meet any of their eyes. Without another word, she turned and walked out, her sneakers making no sound against the cold floor. The glass door sighed shut behind her. The salesman exhaled through his nose, already turning away. He never asked her name. Morning light fell across the showroom like an apology, soft and golden through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same coupe sat near the entrance, untouched since the night before, its polished surface unblemished, its silence now accusatory. At 9:03 a.m., a car unlike anything in the dealership's inventory pulled into the customer parking zone. It was a custom model, matte charcoal paint, bespoke rims, barely street legal. No branding visible, save for the telltale hints of craftsmanship that only connoisseurs would recognize. The driver's door lifted, not swung, and a man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a slate-gray suit tailored so subtly it took a trained eye to catch its perfection. He wore no watch, no visible jewelry. He didn't need them. There was authority in the way he moved. The kind you couldn't fake. He walked into the showroom without a glance toward the cars. Instead, he scanned the space like someone assessing a hotel lobby, pleasant, but not especially important. "Good morning," the same salesman from the night before said quickly, already straightening his tie. He stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Falcon & Royce. Can I assist you?" The man did not extend his hand. He simply said, "I'm here to purchase the 2025 Black Pine Coupe. The one parked near the entrance." "Of course," the salesman replied, already energized. "That's an excellent choice, sir. We can sit down right away and—" "I won't be finalizing the purchase alone," the man interrupted. "Someone will be joining me shortly. I expect her to be treated with the same respect you've shown me." The salesman nodded, slightly confused but careful to mask it. "Absolutely. Can I ask who will be joining you?" The man looked directly at him now, long enough to hold his silence, not quite long enough to make it aggressive. "Just make sure everyone here is watching," he said, voice calm. "I want them to remember what they said yesterday." And then the glass door opened again. She walked in exactly as she had the day before. Same jeans. Same sweater. Hair still in a hasty ponytail. No makeup. No pretense. But she moved with one notable difference. She wasn't alone in the room anymore. The moment stretched. The younger salesman at the desk dropped his pen. A customer standing by the SUV lineup tilted his head, recognition dawning with slow shame. The man turned slightly to her, not touching, not posturing. Just acknowledging. "There you are," he said with quiet warmth. "I believe we have a car to choose." She nodded and walked past the stunned salesman. Her steps were deliberate now, anchored. She approached the coupe again and paused beside it, resting her hand on the side mirror just like yesterday. "This one," she said, her voice even. "Not because of the price. But because of the principle." The silence that followed was thick with unsaid things. Regret. Embarrassment. Something close to fear. The older salesman cleared his throat. Apologies, miss. I didn't realize." "You didn't ask," the man interrupted. "You assumed." He turned to face the entire showroom. "This woman is my fiancée," he said. "She walked into this space yesterday, and you dismissed her because she didn't look the part. But she is the reason I'm buying today. And she'll be the one signing the paperwork. Alone." He stepped back, hands in his pockets, not for effect but simply to get out of her way. And she did sign. Calmly. Without flourish. With a name no one recognized, but one that would soon be engraved on the registration documents of a car that cost more than most people's homes. When it was done, she turned to the older salesman and met his eyes. "I work 16-hour shifts," she said without emotion. "I'm a trauma nurse at St. Michael's. Yesterday, I came here on my break. Today, I took the morning off. Not to prove anything, just to remind myself of what I'm not willing to become." No one spoke. And then she and the man, still unnamed, still poised, turned and left. The door closed behind them. Only once they were gone did the showroom breathe again. The younger salesman let out a low whistle. "That guy," he muttered. "He's Samuel Marlowe," the older one said quietly, pale now. "He's on the board of Blackpine Holdings. One of the original engineers behind the propulsion tech in that coupe. Quiet billionaire. Hates attention." "And her?" the younger one asked. The older man hesitated, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter who she is. What matters is who we decided she wasn't." The car was silent inside, more than silent. It was still. Cocooned. The kind of silence that held space rather than filled it. She sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting lightly on the curve of the console, her face turned toward the window though her eyes didn't focus on the passing city. He didn't rush her. Samuel kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely in his lap. No radio. No questions. Just motion and presence. After several blocks, she finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that. I know. But you did it anyway." He turned his head slightly, keeping his eyes on the road. "Some lessons need witnesses." She exhaled softly. Not a sigh. Something more internal. A release of something old. They pulled into an underground garage beneath a quiet building in Back Bay. The elevator ride up was wordless. She pressed the code herself, familiar with the sequence, and leaned against the wall as they rose. His apartment, though few would call it that, was spare, warm, and lived in without being showy. Art that meant something rather than cost something. Books. Real ones. A well-used espresso machine and a pair of running shoes by the door. She pulled off her sweater, revealing a navy scrub top beneath. "I have to go in at 6. Just for a few hours." Samuel nodded. "Want coffee before you go?" She nodded. "But real coffee. Not the machine." He smiled faintly. "French press it is." As he moved toward the kitchen, she sank into the couch and curled her legs underneath her, her muscles remembering exhaustion. The sunlight through the windows caught the fading bruises on her knuckles, remnants of a difficult shift. Chest compressions. Someone's last chance. I had a patient yesterday, she said after a moment. Young. 19. Overdose. First time, according to his sister. She found him. Pulled him off the bathroom floor and called it in. Samuel didn't interrupt. He made it. Barely. But she sat in the waiting room for 5 hours while we worked. Didn't cry. Didn't ask questions. Just held his jacket the whole time. He poured the water over the grounds, watching the bloom. You stayed late. I stayed until he woke up, she said quietly. Until he knew she was there. He nodded. That's who you are. No, she said, voice cracking slightly. That's who I have to be. Because I don't look like anyone's idea of someone who gets to walk into showrooms and ask about six-figure cars. She rubbed her temple. The worst part is, I knew exactly how that man would treat me. I knew the second I stepped through the door. Samuel walked over and sat beside her, coffee steeping in the background. But you still walked in. Because I wanted to believe someone might look past what they saw. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you've never told me how you ended up on your own. What happened before Boston? She looked at him, long and guarded. Then down at her hands. For years ago, she began. I was engaged to a man I met in nursing school. Smart. Ambitious. Charming. You'd have liked him. Samuel tilted his head. But he liked control more than people, she said. At first, it was small things. What I wore. Where I applied. Then it was passwords. My bank account. The night I got my first job offer, he told me I didn't need to work. That we'd figure it out. I said no. He said I'd regret it. She paused. 2 weeks later, I came home to an empty apartment. No keys. My name scrubbed from our shared accounts. My phone plan cancelled. Just a note on the table. If you're so independent, figure it out. Samuel's jaw clenched subtly, but he said nothing. I did figure it out, she added. I found a spare key I'd forgotten I had. Took my nursing ID and the $22 in my bag. Got a temp job at an urgent care clinic. Took every overnight shift they gave me. Slept in my car for 2 weeks. Then I got a permanent placement at St. Michael's. She sat back. That's the short version. Samuel reached for her hand. He ever tried to contact you? No, she said. But I think about him every time someone calls me sweetheart, while I'm restarting their heart. The coffee timer dinged softly in the background. I'll get it, he said. She watched him walk away. Quiet. Capable. Not trying to fix her. Not trying to rescue her. Just there. He came back with 2 mugs, handed her one. You're stronger than anyone realizes. She gave a tired smile. Maybe. But I still hate that I walked out of that showroom yesterday feeling small. Not anymore. She sipped her coffee. It was dark, perfect, just the way she liked it. Do you know the irony? She said suddenly. That car? I've been saving for 2 years. Every bonus. Every extra shift. Every cancelled vacation. Not because I need a car like that. But because I wanted to prove I could own something no one ever expected someone like me to own. Samuel nodded slowly. You just did. She looked at him. Thank you. For what you did this morning. I didn't do it for you, he said, not unkindly. I did it for the woman in the showroom yesterday. The one they refused to see. She stared at him for a long moment. And then, quietly, reverently, she smiled. She didn't talk much about her shift that evening. Not in the car. Not over the late dinner Samuel insisted she eat before collapsing into sleep. But he knew something in her had tightened again, something subtle, beneath the quiet. He could tell from the way she stirred her soup but didn't taste it. From how long she stared at her phone without touching it. From how she avoided her own reflection in the mirrored backsplash of the kitchen. You know, he said gently. You don't have to prove anything anymore. She glanced up, eyes tired but alert. Don't I? He set his fork down. Not to anyone out there. The look she gave him was almost pitying. You've never been told, to your face, that you don't belong somewhere. That you can't afford to even stand in a room. That your presence is a mistake. She pushed the soup away, still untouched. That showroom wasn't the first time. It was just the most public. He didn't press. Just took her hand and held it in silence until the lines on her forehead softened. 3 days later, the photo surfaced on a car enthusiast forum. Blurry, grainy, likely taken from across the street through tinted glass. But unmistakable, Samuel Marlowe, beside a woman who did not fit the press's typical mold for his companions. She was mid-stride, exiting the coupe. No designer heels. No statement bag. No high-gloss presentation. Just presence. By noon, her name, first and last, was trending. She hadn't prepared for that. They found her nursing credentials, her hospital profile. Someone even located a 10-second clip from a healthcare recruitment video she'd filmed during the pandemic. Her voiceover calm, clipped, as she described triage protocols while masked and exhausted. The comments started predictably. This her? Really? Guess he's into charity cases now. She must be magic behind closed doors. He could do better. Way better. And then came worse. Screenshots circulated. Anonymously posted images from her early nursing years, back when she worked overnight security shifts just to afford licensure exams. Posts dissected everything, from her shoes to the brand of moisturizer on her bathroom counter, guessed through a zoomed-in mirror reflection. She didn't cry. But she did go silent. That night, she stood on the balcony of Samuel's apartment, wrapped in a hoodie that wasn't hers, staring at the city like it was something she was still negotiating with. Samuel found her there, arms folded tightly across her chest. They found me, she said, her voice low. Found everything. My student debt. My residency salary. A picture of my mother's house with peeling paint and an above-ground pool. She looked over at him. And the worst part? I expected it. He leaned on the railing beside her, hands clasped. I thought maybe if I earned enough, worked hard enough, was useful enough, they'd just leave me alone. But now I'm being called a gold digger for a man who's never paid for my dinner unless I let him. Samuel didn't try to defend her. Or fix the mess. Or even distract her. Instead, he said, when I made my first million, people said I'd cheated. When I sold my second company, they said I'd gotten lucky. By the time I made my first billion, the narrative was that I must have stepped on people to get there. He turned toward her. People don't need evidence to hate. Just a convenient story. Her jaw tightened. I'm not your story. No, he said softly. You're your own. The hospital administrator called her in the next morning, not to scold, but to warn. You've done nothing wrong, he said, hands folded on his desk. But the board is jittery. We've received a dozen inquiries from press posing as patients. They're asking for your schedule, your credentials, even your address. I know, she said. They've called my mother. Twice. The administrator frowned. We're going to put a note on your file. Restrict patient requests. Move you off public-facing duties for a few weeks. I'm not being punished? Not even close. You're being protected. She left his office with mixed relief and shame. That evening, a woman approached her at the employee entrance, middle-aged, neat, holding a takeout bag. Are you the nurse? The one in the photo? She froze, unsure whether to nod. The woman's eyes filled before she could speak again. I just wanted to say, thank you. You were my son's nurse 3 years ago. After his motorcycle crash. You sat with him for 9 hours. You braided his girlfriend's hair when she collapsed in the waiting room. You never once asked for recognition. The woman handed her the bag. It's just stew. But I thought you might need something kind today. After she left, the nurse sat on the curb beside the hospital for a full minute, holding the bag in her lap like it was something sacred. Later that night, Samuel read aloud from one of her old notebooks. He'd found it tucked in her backpack, half full of medical notes, the rest of it random thoughts and diagrams. At first, she was embarrassed. But as he read, his voice slow and even, she realized she'd forgotten who she used to be. There were no grand declarations. Just fragments. Patient coded at 3:12 a.m. held her hand until the family arrived. It wasn't heroic. It just felt human. Tried to explain to a mother today why her child would wake up looking different. Said she'll still be your girl. She'll just have a new kind of story. Sometimes I wonder if the world values the wrong things. If I dropped out and made YouTube videos about lipstick, would anyone listen to me more? Samuel closed the notebook and set it beside her. You know what I think? He asked. She shook her head, suddenly shy. I think this is what strength looks like when no one's watching. She didn't reply. Just leaned her head against his shoulder, quiet again. But this time, not because she was hiding. By the end of the week, she'd disabled all her social media. Not that she had much to begin with, a dormant Instagram with blurry shots of hospital potlucks and a few sunset photos from her lone trip to Portland. But it was the principle. Every account, every digital door she'd once left ajar, now closed with a click. She changed her phone number. Told her mother to ignore unknown calls. And asked Samuel, quietly but firmly, to speak to his lawyer about issuing a public statement, something factual, neutral. Just enough to end the feeding frenzy. He didn't hesitate. The lawyer crafted a message and released it by noon the next day. Mr. Marlowe confirms that the woman in the now viral images is his fiancée. She is a licensed trauma nurse, a medical professional of exceptional integrity, and someone who values her privacy. Mr. Marlowe will not comment further on their personal life. Any continued intrusion will be met with legal recourse. That was all. But the tone of it, measured, unwavering, shifted the tide. Slowly. The paparazzi outside the hospital disappeared within days. The speculative headlines grew bored. The internet, as it does, moved on. First to a celebrity divorce, then to a fashion scandal, then somewhere else entirely. By the following week, she was back in the ER. On her first shift back, the head nurse handed her a folder, thick, full of cases that had piled up in her absence. You don't have to take all of them, she said gently. But they're yours if you want them. She nodded. I want them. 3 hours later, she was elbow-deep in triage, stitching a construction worker's torn palm, mediating between a panicked father and an overwhelmed intern, and gently explaining to a new mother why her child's fever wasn't an emergency. It was like breathing again. Controlled chaos. Clean adrenaline. Something to pour herself into without apology. Later that night, as she changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, a new nurse, fresh from orientation, approached hesitantly. I just wanted to say. The girl began, cheeks flushed. You're why I applied here. My sister sent me that photo. The one from the showroom. Said you looked like someone who didn't care what anyone thought. I'd been scared to apply to a trauma unit, but I saw you and I thought, if she can do that, maybe I can do this. The woman blinked. She wasn't sure what startled her more, being seen, or being believed. She offered a quiet smile. You'll do just fine. Later that week, Samuel invited her to a private event. A small gathering. Just a few investors and board members, no press, no photographers. He called it a technical summit, but it was also a rebranding of sorts. A return to the roots of the company he'd helped build, away from the glossier image others had projected onto him. She wore a navy sheath dress. Simple. Professional. Hair pulled back. No jewelry. When they arrived, the room quieted. Not with discomfort, but awareness. One of the older engineers, white-bearded, leather-bound notebook in hand, approached her as Samuel shook hands across the room. I read about you, the man said. But I don't believe in headlines. She met his gaze. Neither do I. He smiled. Then we're off to a good start. On the drive home, Samuel glanced at her from the corner of his eye. You were calm in there. I've been calmer in emergency C-sections, she said wryly. He chuckled. But thank you, she added, for letting me decide how I walked in. That's always going to be your choice. She nodded, watching the skyline drift by. After a moment, you ever think about how people wear different masks depending on the room? He nodded. Sometimes they forget they're wearing one. Mine's not to blend in, she said. It's to keep breathing. He didn't ask what she meant. She was grateful for that. Later that night, she stood before her bathroom mirror, fingertips tracing the fading indentations the day had left on her skin. Then, carefully, deliberately, she pulled out an old photograph from the drawer beneath the sink. She and her sister, aged 10 and 12. Thrift store dresses. Mismatched barrettes. Their arms around each other, grinning with ferocity. She remembered that day. The fundraiser. Their mother working double shifts. No money for new shoes, but matching socks. Her sister had said, "We look rich." And she had believed it. That photograph had lived in a drawer for years, face down, like a memory too fragile to confront. Now, she pinned it to the corner of the mirror. Not as a talisman. Not as motivation. But as evidence. That she'd already survived worse than what the world thought of her. That she'd always known who she was. Even when no one else could see it. The car was hers now. Not just on paper. Not just in registration. It was parked outside her apartment, not in Samuel's underground garage. She insisted on that. Samuel hadn't argued. He'd simply had it delivered with a handwritten note on the seat. Drive it like it never had a price tag. She didn't use it for show. She used it for grocery runs, for late-night shifts, for quiet Sunday drives where she could breathe between patient files and public whispers. There was something satisfying about the contrast. Engine purring beneath her worn sneakers, sterile hospital badge clipped to her sweater. She liked the questions it raised. Let them wonder. One Sunday morning, while she was leaning against the car hood with a coffee in hand, a teenager approached hesitantly. He wore a delivery uniform, bike messenger, judging by the sweat and scuffed shoes. Sorry, he said, voice cracking with nerves. I know it's weird. I've never seen anyone like you drive one of these. She raised an eyebrow. Like me? Yeah, he said, cheeks flushing. I mean, you're not. You don't look like the kind of person they show in the ads. She took a sip of coffee. Maybe they need better ads. He stared a moment, then smiled shyly. It's a cool car. She tossed him the keys. Go sit in it, she said. You break anything, you owe me an arm and a leg, preferably the leg. I'm a trauma nurse. He blinked. Are you serious? She nodded. You already assumed something about me. I figure I get to return the favor. He sat in the car, reverent. Didn't touch the controls. Just sat there, grinning like a kid who'd stolen fire. Before he left, he said, Thanks. For the surprise. Anytime, she said, smiling. Keep chasing things that don't make sense to other people. She didn't tell Samuel about it. Not because it was a secret, but because it wasn't about him. It was about reclaiming space. Rewriting definitions. Reminding herself that wealth wasn't just about acquisition. It was about agency. They had dinner that night, in his kitchen. No formality. Just leftovers and open wine in the comfort of two people not needing to impress each other. I've been thinking, he said between bites of roasted chicken. About the ball. She looked up. The foundation gala? He nodded. They want me to speak. You'll be asked to come with me? She was quiet for a long time. Are you going? She asked. I don't know, he admitted. Feels performative. All suits and handshakes and selective empathy. Then don't, she said. You don't owe them theater. He set down his fork. They'll ask about you. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They always do. What do you want to tell them? She paused. Nothing, she said. Let them wonder. Let them sit with the idea that some stories don't come with labels. Later, as they stood brushing their teeth side by side, she asked without looking up from the sink. If I told you I didn't want to be anyone's public statement, would that change anything? Samuel met her eyes in the mirror. No, he said. But if I told you I didn't want to be your shield anymore, would that? She rinsed her mouth, then leaned against the counter. I never wanted a shield, she said quietly. Just someone who doesn't flinch when I stop hiding. Then we're even, he said. The next morning, she drove to her mother's house with a casserole and a folder of legal documents. Her mother had always been practical. Raised 3 daughters on minimum wage and iron discipline. She never trusted institutions. Or men in suits. When she saw the car, she arched an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, she opened the front door and stepped aside. You didn't have to bring food. I'm not dying. You're getting knee surgery, her daughter said. Which means you'll be cranky, immobile, and bossy for at least 2 weeks. Her mother grunted. That's how I was before. They sat in the kitchen, where the wallpaper hadn't changed in 20 years. Where old spice jars still lined the window like trophies. You're not wearing the ring, her mother noted, without looking up. She hesitated. I'm not sure I want to be a wife. Her mother sipped her tea. That man care for you? Yes. Is he kind when no one's looking? Yes. Her mother nodded. Then stop worrying about what the label means to everyone else. Make your own damn definition. That night, she stood in her apartment doorway, staring at the velvet ring box Samuel had given her 2 months ago. She hadn't said no. She just hadn't said yes. Now she opened it. The ring was simple. A platinum band. No stone. No center. Just a perfect, unbroken circle. She slipped it on her finger. It didn't change anything. But it didn't have to. The letter arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, paper thick, envelope unmarked. Inside, just 1 page. Handwritten. She recognized the script instantly. She hadn't seen it in over 4 years. But some things remained burned in muscle memory, like the sound of someone calling your name across a crowded room. She sat down before reading it. Her hands didn't shake. But her breath shortened as she unfolded the page. Asterisk, I heard about the car. About the photos. And I saw you standing there, looking like you'd always belonged, and I knew I never really saw you at all. I don't expect forgiveness. I barely expect this letter to be read. But I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not for what I did. I can't undo that. I'm sorry for what I made you believe, that your value was conditional. That your worth was mine to measure. You were never the one who needed to change. I was just too afraid to admit it. I hope the life you built without me is one you chose freely. I hope it's filled with people who don't need you to explain your presence. M***. No signature. Just the initial. She folded it back slowly. Not out of reverence. Out of habit. Like she was packing away something fragile that no longer had power over her. She didn't tell Samuel. Not right away. It wasn't a secret. But some ghosts you have to dismiss on your own. That weekend, she returned to her mother's house. Her sister had come home for the weekend, bringing her toddler and an exhausted smile. The backyard was chaos. Children, plastic cups, folding chairs, laughter. She stood by the porch rail with a beer in hand, watching her niece chase a bubble with the kind of focus adults forgot how to summon. You look different, her sister said, appearing beside her. How so? Like you're not bracing for impact anymore. She smiled faintly. Maybe I'm not. Still with the engineer? Yes. Her sister nudged her. Is he boring? In the best possible way. Good, she said. After what you went through, boring is sacred. Samuel met her at the car when she got back. He was holding groceries in one arm, mail in the other. His shirt sleeves were rolled. His collar undone. The sight of him felt like coming home. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it quietly in the living room while she unpacked the groceries, her movements purposeful. Not rushed. Not defensive. Just matter of fact. When he finished, he set it down carefully. I hate that he made you believe any of that. he said. So did I, she replied. But it's not about him anymore. Do you want me to respond? She shook her head. I already did. The day I walked into that showroom and didn't flinch. They went walking that evening, through the park, across the stone bridge that curved over the duck pond. Families passed them, couples in varying stages of comfort. She watched them all with a strange sense of distance, as if she'd stepped outside the script for a moment, and could finally hear its rhythms from afar. You still want to marry me? She asked suddenly. Samuel didn't miss a beat. I do. She looked at him. Not for show? Not for press. Not for stability. Not even for love, he said. For something harder. Something that survives past the butterflies and the ring and the headlines. She nodded. Then let's do it. But quietly. No venue. No gowns. Just a courthouse, a Sunday, and a meal afterward. His smile was slow, deep, real. You driving us there? Of course, she said. In the coupe. We'll park it like we stole it. 3 weeks later, they stood before a county clerk. She wore a blue blouse. He wore a gray jacket. The ring stayed the same, unadorned, perfect. Their vows were short. Practical. Full of verbs. I promise to witness your becoming. I promise not to shield you, but to stand beside you. I promise to listen, especially when it's hard. Afterward, they went to a small diner on the east side, plastic menus, linoleum floors, a waitress who called everyone honey. As they waited for their order, a little girl in the next booth stared at her. At her jeans. Her bare ring finger. Her quiet posture. She met the girl's eyes, smiled softly, and winked. The girl grinned. Whispered something to her mother. And her mother turned, saw them together, and smiled back. Not because they looked like anyone else. But because they didn't have to. There was no honeymoon. Not because they couldn't afford one, but because either of them had the urge to escape anything. She returned to the hospital 2 days later. Samuel resumed his schedule of investor calls and late-night design reviews. The marriage certificate was folded into a fireproof envelope and placed in a drawer next to health insurance documents and spare keys. And life, beautifully ordinary and unspectacular, resumed. She liked it that way. The morning alarms. The shared kitchen rituals. The quiet way Samuel left a thermos of coffee by the door when she worked the 4 a.m. trauma shifts. The groceries that replenished themselves. The ease of someone moving through space without requiring permission or explanation. But peace, even the hard-earned kind, has a way of growing thin when real life presses harder. It started with a call from the foundation. They wanted Samuel to headline a major tech summit in Tokyo. 1 week. Private jet. Press circuit. And they wanted her to accompany him, not just as his wife, but as a narrative. Power couple. The PR woman said cheerfully on speakerphone. Engineer meets frontline healthcare hero. It's a dream angle. Samuel's eyes had gone flat. She watched him take a long breath before replying. We'll think about it. Afterward, he turned to her. We don't have to go. But she didn't answer right away. Because the truth was more complicated. That night, she stood in front of her old apartment building for the first time in over a year. It was smaller than she remembered. The windows dull, the siding chipped. The unit where she had once slept curled on a hand-me-down mattress now belonged to someone else. She stood across the street with a coffee in hand, watching the light flicker in what used to be her bedroom. A nurse walked by and recognized her. You used to live here, right? That place above the garage? She nodded, surprised. I thought it was you, the nurse said. Saw you in that online video about the hospital's surgical team. You looked like someone who made it out. I guess I did, she said softly. The nurse smiled. That give me hope. Most days, I'm just hoping my radiator doesn't break again. They parted ways. And she stood alone for a long time after, thinking not about how far she'd come, but about how much of herself she'd buried on this block. When she got home, Samuel was on the floor with a tablet in his lap and schematics open beside him. He looked up when she came in, studied her face. You went back, he said. She nodded. How did it feel? Like I owe her more than a return visit. He set the tablet aside. We don't have to go to Tokyo. No, she said. But I think I do. The summit was chaos. Photographers, translators, glove drivers, and silk-suited aides. Her name, mispronounced, introduced 3 times with titles she hadn't earned. She didn't wear a gown. She wore a pressed navy suit with low heels and a badge clipped to her pocket that read, Registered Nurse, St. Michael's Trauma Unit. No brand. No designer. And she didn't smile for the cameras. She spoke on a panel about frontline burnout instead. About how proximity to death changes your understanding of success. About how hospitals had become battlegrounds long before the pandemic, and how women like her had been holding the front lines in silence for decades. The room was quiet when she finished. No applause. Just silence that tasted like reverence. Later, after the last photo op, Samuel found her leaning against a wall near the exit. You were extraordinary, he said. She shrugged. I didn't say anything new. Maybe not, he said. But you said it like someone who lived it. They walked out into the Tokyo night. The air thick with spring and traffic. She reached for his hand, not out of need, but as an anchor. I don't want to be a narrative, she said. I just want to be real. You've never been anything else. A week later, back in Boston, she was asked to lead a mentorship program at the hospital. Young nurses. Mostly women. Mostly from working-class neighborhoods. All of them hungry and exhausted in equal measure. One of them stayed late after the first session. Can I ask you something? The girl said, clutching her notes like armor. How do you know you belong here? The woman paused. I don't, she said. Not all the time. But I know I didn't work this hard just to wait for someone else to tell me I do. The girl nodded, eyes wide. Make your space, she added. And if they try to take it, build a bigger one. She didn't tell Samuel about the conversation. But he noticed the change. How she stood straighter when she walked into a room. How she took fewer calls from the PR team. How she stopped responding to every invitation dressed in words like visibility and inspiration. The world was still watching. But now she was watching it back. One morning, as she sat in the coupe outside the hospital, her shift not yet begun, she looked down at her hands. Same calluses. Same skin. Same fingers that had once reached for door handles and been pushed away. And then she reached for her badge and clipped it to her shirt. Not for entry. But as a declaration. She wasn't a story. She was the author. It was a letter this time. Not from an ex, not from a journalist, not from anyone trying to rewrite their name into her story. It was from a woman named Helen. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside were just 3 sentences, written in clean, deliberate script. You don't know me, but I knew him. He spoke of you once, after the headlines, before the fall. And I wanted you to know, he wished he'd asked how you got your strength instead of pretending he already knew. She folded it without emotion. Placed it under a paperweight on the kitchen table. Samuel glanced at her from the stove. Another piece of the past? Just another version of the same regret, she replied. They didn't talk about it again. Spring came late that year. When it did, it arrived in fits, sunlight that lingered past dinner time, air that warmed but didn't commit, flowers blooming in hesitant clusters like children peeking out from under covers. On her walk to work, she started noticing the small things again. A dog waiting patiently by a bakery door. A man with a prosthetic leg running faster than most people walk. A teenage girl helping her younger brother with his backpack, muttering encouragements between complaints. Things that didn't make headlines. Things that didn't ask for recognition. Things that survived because they had to, and learned to make that look graceful. Her mentorship group grew. So did her voice. A journalist asked to profile her. Not for the tabloids this time, but for a long-form piece on healthcare reform. She said yes on one condition: they didn't mention Samuel. Not once. The journalist was confused. He's your husband. He's not the story, she said. Not this one. The article published 2 weeks later, titled simply, The Nurse Who Stayed. It detailed her work during the worst of the pandemic, her efforts to organize protective equipment for understaffed units, her refusal to leave after her first burnout leave, choosing instead to come back and train new hands. It didn't go viral. It didn't trend. But 5 nurses emailed her afterward. Each one said the same thing in different words. You made me feel like it was okay to stay. One evening, she and Samuel sat on the balcony. The city below them breathed like a sleeping giant, lights winking on, windows becoming mirrors. Do you ever miss who you were before all this? She asked. He thought for a long moment. I miss the illusion that life could be compartmentalized, he said. That I could build one version of myself and leave the others behind. She nodded. I miss believing that if I worked hard enough, no one would ever question why I was in the room. And now? Now I know the questions don't stop, she said. But I don't answer all of them anymore. He smiled. That sounds like power. No, she said. That sounds like peace. Weeks later, she received another package. This one addressed to the hospital. Inside was a book, A History of Women in Medicine. No note. No sender. But one page was dog-eared. She flipped to it. The legacy of many women in healthcare is not written in headlines or history books. It is passed quietly, one generation to the next, through stories, hands, and the example of staying when others leave. She closed the book. Then walked down the hall to teach another class. Later that night, as she stood in the mirror brushing her teeth, she looked not at her reflection, but at the photo still pinned to the glass. 2 little girls, smiling through second-hand dresses and unshakable dreams. She smiled back. And for the first time, she saw no distance between them. They didn't have children. Not because they couldn't, and not because they didn't try, but because time moved faster than they thought it would, and eventually, they stopped measuring their love by what it didn't hold. There were still children, though. The ones she stitched, soothed, steadied. The ones she trained others to care for. The ones who remembered the warmth of her voice more than the pressure of her hands. At 41, she was offered the directorship of trauma nursing at the hospital. A position that came with an office and a nameplate and far fewer patients than she liked. She hesitated. You're allowed to evolve, Samuel said when she voiced her doubt. I know, she said. But I never wanted a desk to be the proof that I mattered. Then don't let it be, he said. Let it be the place you open the door for someone else. She accepted the role. Moved into the office. Kept the door open. Samuel's company changed, too. Slowly, under his hand. He stepped down from the board. Invested in smaller ventures. Mentored new engineers. Built things he didn't need his name on. He stopped speaking at panels that asked him to summarize himself in 15 minutes. He stayed home more. Tended to his balcony tomatoes with absurd precision. She watched him sometimes through the kitchen window, hands dirt-streaked, glasses pushed up on his head. A man who had once invented propulsion algorithms, now talking to plants like they owed him nothing and everything. They were older now. Not in the tired way. But in the sharpened way. Wiser. Quieter. Less interested in being right, more concerned with being clear. They argued more. But with kindness. They loved differently. With margin. With memory. With the understanding that trust wasn't a guarantee, it was a choice you kept making. One evening, she gave a lecture to a class of final-year nursing students. A simple topic, what they don't teach you in school. Near the end, a student raised her hand. Do you ever feel like you didn't do enough? She paused, thumb brushing her wedding band. All the time, she said. But not in the way you think. She stepped around the podium. There's no final exam for this work. No perfect score. Just moments. Moments you show up for or you don't. The room was quiet. Your career won't be measured by the number of patients you save. It'll be measured by how many you stayed with, especially when you couldn't save them. Later that night, she sat on the floor with old photos. The ones she'd avoided for years. She was cataloging them now, not to forget, but to remember with intention. One photo stopped her. The showroom. Someone had snapped it, blurry, probably on a phone. She was walking toward the car, chin lifted, back straight. The faintest smile on her face. Samuel sat down beside her. "Keep that one," he said. "Why?" "Because that's the moment you stopped waiting for permission." She nodded. Then placed it in the center of the album. They didn't celebrate anniversaries. Not in the traditional sense. But once a year, without fail, they drove the coupe back to that showroom. It had changed hands twice since. The staff was different. The branding new. They didn't go inside. They just parked across the street. Shared a coffee. Watched the front doors. And remembered. Not out of spite. But out of gratitude. Not for how far they'd come. But for who they'd refused to stop becoming.